Welcome, everyone. I'm going to turn it to Dr. Wilkins to introduce our guest for today.
Thank you, Hedi. For our second guest, and I'm going to do an introduction for that 2 to 5% of the world who doesn't know who our next guest is. Our next guest is Dr. Adam Schiavi. He is the Assistant Professor of Anesthesiology and Critical Care Medicine at the Johns Hopkins Medicine in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Schiavi has demonstrated an interest in organ donation, and he also is a great teacher. I've had the pleasure of being with him at panelists at different venues, most notably the National Organ Donor Summit that the Alliance put on. We had a great time presenting there. Dr. Schiavi is a wonderful person to theorize with. He's incredibly bright. And of course, he's one of the individuals who was gracious enough to critique our book and give a testimonial for our book. Hedi's showing our book there. We're very proud of that.
I'm on the back.
Oh, wow.
He made the cover. And so we're really, really honored to have him with us here today. And Dr. Schiavi, before I pepper you with questions for today, any comments you want to make at all to our Facebook audience?
Well, I just want to say thanks to Harry and Hedi for inviting me to come on the show. I'm thrilled to be here. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. Hopefully our discussion will be able to do it justice, and we'll have a nice conversation today.
One of the things that we do on this, on the Fundamental Friends and Roots, since we've got a short period of time, what we like to try and do is highlight different aspects of the book. And you know, when we do the workshops, we always tell people you may just come away with one or maybe two concepts from the book. And so the thought is, let's just talk about one concept. And the one concept we wanted to ask you about is, in the book, if you haven't read the book, there's a concept of the emotional funnel. And the brief concept is that physicians will have a range of experiences. So they'll experience sadness and fear and guilt and that sort of thing. However, we're sort of conditioned as physicians to not really show those feelings, right? So a lot of times we may be incredibly sad about an outcome, and when we talk to the patients' families, we don't want to cry on the inside. And so the thought behind the funnel is that physicians have a very narrow window of expression of those feelings, and typically it comes down to three. It's either sarcasm or anger or withdrawal. And so I wanted to ask you, Dr. Schiavi, is do you feel like physicians have a narrow window of expressions of their feelings to emotions, situations, and if so, why?
Well, Harry, I have to say that before learning about the emotional funnel, I sort of had some concept or thought of that was already sort of there, and it was unique. It was very interestingly put into words that were easy for me to understand and be able to reflect on and recognize, of course, when you guys talked about it. And I'm reading it and I was like, you know what, this is really great, because not only do I see it in colleagues, I also see it in myself. And I never actually thought about it until I was able to put it in the structure and think about it of the funnel, where you take all of that stuff, all of the range of human emotion, and then it all just gets collected, goes down the little tube and gets spit out at the bottom. And the three things that I think, frankly, were the three emotions that we're allowed to have, right? And I guess to answer the question simply, yes, I do think that there is a limited range of emotions that physicians have in the professional setting. And there's, I think, a number of reasons why that would be the case. Like I said, I recognize it in others, but I also recognize it in myself. And I've been trying real hard to recognize it in myself when that actually happens, and then do something about it, right? So,
yeah, and that's the key, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's, I mean, recognition obviously is the first step to recovery. So if we're trying to recover our emotions,
emotional cripples.
Exactly. And that's probably a really good way to put it. Emotional cripples. And I think maybe quite a few physicians actually are emotional cripples. And we have to ask ourselves the reason, well, why is that the case? And I think that it probably has a lot to do with the situation that physicians are in a lot, the way we're trained, thinking about physician culture, which you guys also talk about. And I personally think a lot of that physician culture about having to know everything, you're responsible for everything, everything is a reflection back on you. It sort of sets up like a loop between the physician and the people that the physician deals with, or the people that are on the team. I'm just thinking from my own experience in the ICU leading rounds. And it's a series of expectations that start cycling, that people would have expectations of the physician, but then the physician knows that those expectations are there. And so behavior is modified because they have the expectation that that's the expectation that people have for them. And it just kind of cycles around. And I think the only way that—
Right. Well, after years and years, it becomes reinforcing. Right?
Exactly,
you have the
right.
training and you have an experience, and then that experience is reinforced until by the time you're a seasoned physician, they're just, you don't think about it, and it's an aha, well, wow, this is do that.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And so you end up with only a few things because we think that we have that expectation, and then you get conditioned, like you're saying, to only really have those three emotions. And that while you may think of all these other things, you think that, well, that's not the way my doctor would want, that's not the way I would want my doctor to be. And as a doctor, you're like, well, they don't think that I should do anything else but this. And then again, you set up that cycle, and it keeps on going round and round. And
I've got a follow-up challenging question to that. And sometimes you have to understand this is something I'm working through as well. You know, when I've had the great fortune of doing this workshop with Hedi for years and years. The book is the culmination of that, and it makes you examine yourself. I mean, I can make fun of people by saying we're emotionally crippled, because my aha is, I put myself in those positions and think, wait, why did I blow up at that nurse then? What was really behind that? So I guess one of the questions I have for you is, having had that aha and thinking about that, what tips would you have for dealing with physicians on how to interpret those three basic emotions? Any tips on how to get to the feeling underneath the emotion when you're dealing with those physicians who blow up on you, or they're sarcastic, or they just withdraw from you?
Absolutely. I think that you sort of have to break that cycle of expectations that goes in both directions. And it may be easier for the physician to be able to try to break that cycle. And so if you are thinking, I mean, who among us are going to fully admit, hello, my name is Adam, I'm an emotional cripple, thank you for coming, right? Some people may have the capacity for doing that kind of a thing. Other people may not. And I wonder, I mean, maybe Harry or Hedi, you even have some insight into this. I wonder, the people that would be less likely to reflect upon that, or the people that maybe are more likely to use the heuristic of the funnel to make it easy to have an emotional response of anything to a stressful situation. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that people that would be less likely to admit it are the people that would be more likely to do it? I don't have a sense of that.
I definitely think that self-reflection makes you more aware of your typical responses, and the more you self-reflect, the more likely you can put on the pause, stop yourself, and reset in the moment. And that takes a lot of practice and commitment, but it starts with self-awareness and then self-reflection. And as both of you kind of identified, you may have not necessarily been aware that this was really happening, and that this is something you have been, in a sense, conditioned to over a long period of time. And so I'm not sure how many physicians are actually aware of it until they kind of, unless they're super self-reflective people, or until they read something kind of like you did and went, oh, this was exactly what I've been kind of thinking about. I think in that situation, then you can redirect it. But yes, I think people who don't really spend the time reflecting are probably more likely to express those emotions.
Yeah, and so I wonder then if to be able to break the cycle, you'd have to have both people on side, each side, the physician and the non-physician. I mean, we're obviously coming at this from the point of a physician today. So it's kind of hard to get away from that, but physician and non-physician side. And if everybody on the team is thinking about, good communication and good communication with the team leader who, and, in this case would be the physician, well, how do we all communicate better? And if the physician is self-reflective enough, maybe they would say, well, I'm going to learn about this and understand what this means, and then say, well, I recognize that in myself, and then we can work on strategies to figure out how to do it. And if the physician were going to exhibit more emotions, maybe, or not be afraid of exhibiting more emotions in the workplace, or more normal, emotions, not crippled ones, that maybe people would react differently in that environment or on the team. And then, of course, on the other side, if maybe a physician was not as reflective and wasn't able to do that, but has a good relationship with their team, I think that it's probably far easier for people on that team who may understand this heuristic that we're talking about, the shortcut of thinking, or the shortcut of emotion, to say, hey, Harry, I noticed that you got angry for no reason there. What's going on? And Harry has a good enough relationship with his team that he can be like, well, you know what, I'm a little bit offended by that, but thank you for that, because I understand what's going on as well, and then talk about it and work it out. But I definitely agree that knowing and having some understanding and self-reflection and is probably the first way to start thinking about that. But then getting the team involved and getting the communication group that you're working with to all think about it in that way also, it can probably just I think it would set up a better relationship overall, with more of an open line of communication, and breaking down that expectation loop, that I have these expectations of you and I expect that you have them of me. And once you get past all that and you stop making all these assumptions, then you actually, probably are going to communicate a lot better, maybe even be a little bit better friends. And, and I know it's kind of not really supposed to have that kind of friend at work.
You bring up a very good point, Adam, and I can tell you're in anesthesiology, because I think your field has embraced this whole concept of team-based care probably more than other disciplines have. And I like what you said about, if you have this team that you trust, someone can then go behind that expression. So you said, Harry, I noticed you got real angry. I wonder what's going on there. And just that little bit is almost enough to force the self-reflection if that relationship is there. I think that's such a great point that you just made.
Absolutely.
It's a really good point.
That's a pretty good insight there too, Harry, thinking about it. If I say I'm in the OR and I'm working with one of my good friends in neurosurgery, for instance, and something's going wrong, and they're focusing down and narrowing in on things, and maybe we're not having the same conversation we did, or they're getting stressed out for some reason, or I notice they're getting a little short and they're getting snippy because they're really worried about something that's happened and they're trying to focus, but maybe not everybody else is on board with what they're trying to do. I have a sense of that, and many anesthesiologists and anesthesia people would have a sense of, hey, what's going on up there? And pull the drape down and be like, what's going on, guys? What can I help you with? Or, what's going on? Or, is anything we need to support to get through this? Or, that kind of a thing. And having that relationship with the surgeon, at least the two attendings in the room typically would have that relationship. I think it's a lot easier to be like, what's going on? Why are you acting funny?
I think when Hedi and I talk with OPOs across the country, one of the things that we hear a lot from the OPO staff is that sometimes it's so hard for them to take that from physicians. They hear that anger, they feel that sarcasm, or like literally they'll say, I'll walk on the floor, and they literally just walk away from it. What's that all about? And it comes down to those three things. So we try to work on trying to figure out what is the emotion underlying the action. So what you're actually seeing, that anger, that withdrawal, that sarcasm, may be fear. It may be doubt. Those are things that professionally we're not really supposed to express, and so they come out differently. You work with physicians, you work with residents and medical students all the time. Adam, with your insight from maybe reading the book and hearing about this emotional funnel, what do you think in terms of the new generation of physicians coming up? how can we reach them and get them more self-aware about this issue?
Yeah, that's a great thought, Harry. I think that, well, I think that maybe our training, being a little bit older, is probably a lot different than the training that people are getting now. I remember when I was in medical school, they just started a program or a course on, it's almost like on being human, right? How do you be a human and be a physician as well? And this is I guess when it was probably about 15 years ago, I guess. And I recognized then, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I liked it. I came into medicine a little bit later in life and possibly a little older, having had worked before, maybe a little bit mature than some of the people I was with because I was so much older than they were. Maybe, I say, just maybe.
A little bit more life experience.
Life experience, yeah. Right. But I was able to recognize that aspect of it, maybe in a way that younger people who don't have that same life experience would. And I looking at the way people are now, the young people coming through the residency, even the fellowship, I feel like there's a higher degree of emotional sensitivity because I think at the time, 15 years ago, that was just sort of the beginning of that idea. And I think that that's been developed quite a bit in the medical schools now, and that I think that there's probably a big gender gap. Maybe the older people are a little bit more likely to fall prey to these heuristics, where the younger people may have learned about it more than we ever did or even thought about, and it's sort of being trained into them a little bit different than it was trained into us. So the physician culture for our time was, the three big things about knowing everything and being responsible for everything, and it's always a reflection on you. I don't know if that is so pronounced now. And so if I was going to talk to people about this, I would ask them, well, what type of humanistic training have you gotten, or emotional intelligence and training have you gotten? And then sort of prey on that and say, well, what are you doing in your medical school that's addressing these issues of developing good relationships, that sort of thing. And then talk to them about it and see what they would be willing to share and possibly learn from them some of the modern ways that medicine is being taught.
Well, that's helpful to know that you have that background, that maybe things will be changing and us older dogs can learn new tricks.
So it sounds to me like both of you have said you've been conditioned to that really the only acceptable ways of expressing emotions are withdrawal, anger, and sarcasm, but usually there's something behind that. How did that conditioning happen? Is that role modeling? Is that your attendings when you were resident drilling you? And I mean, how does that develop?
Well,
I think it's for me.
No, go ahead, Eric. No.
For me, I think, and Hedi, I've talked about this, but as I've thought about this a lot, and Adam, I think you probably thought about it too, but I always think about some of my typical responses when I'm feeling sad, or if I think maybe I messed something up. There's a bit of guilt that goes along with that. A patient dies and you just go over and over and over in your head, was there something that I messed up? You get this horrible sense that you failed that person. And then as you're thinking about and ruminating it, you're walking down the hall, someone asks you, hey, how are you doing? And the typical response is, well, just another day in paradise. I mean, just such a sarcastic remark to someone just trying to be nice to you while you're ruminating to this. So I think, Hedi, it's a matter of, it's just conditioning, and it's just reinforced over time and role modeling. I don't think anyone actually sits and tells you, you only have 3 ways you can bond.
Right.
I think it's just something we've come along. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's explicit in that sense. I think that it probably is more implicit. It probably is a distillation of just the overarching way that we're taught and the expectations that are put on people as they're learning medicine, right? I can remember being a medical student, right? And your only goal is to go and try and learn something, right? Have somebody with a lot of knowledge and wisdom teach you something interesting about the patient or about something like that. But it always seemed like the only way that you were going to be able to extract a nugget of information is if you went that extra mile and tried to learn more and demonstrated that I know more, than the guy next to me. It's always in competition for who knows the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the person who is the gunner getting up there, knocking everybody else down is the one who is going to, be noticed. And so everybody is shooting for that. Everybody is trying to get at that. And I think that's at least part of the way of how it gets ingrained in people that you need to know everything, because you go into the ICU, you as a medical student or even as a resident, and they say, well, these are your 5 patients. By the end of the day, you better know every single detail of that patient.
Yeah. Well, and as a nurse, I've witnessed it many times where, the attending will drill the residents, and then it's almost like sometimes I'm standing there going, you knew full well that they didn't know the answer to that.
Absolutely, of course. But that's not the point, right?
And you're trying to shame them and drill this into them that they need to know everything. But at the same time, so you said that the new generation, we are seeing a change in the training. Yeah. But even for yourself, who has been trained newer than Dr. Wilkins, I guess my question is, if the older generation is still the attendings and they're setting these expectations and role modeling, what is the chance of breaking the cycle of this emotional funnel with the new generation? Do you think it would come from just that they have more self-awareness and are trained to be more reflective about that? Or
I think that it's probably, cultural change takes a long time. You can't just be like, all right, we need to change the culture and there you go. It's a generational thing for sure. And I think that younger people now are less likely to tolerate our nonsense, right? And so,
one of the things I was going to ask you, Adam, as I was thinking is, you mentioned before that when you have this team-based learning and someone steps up and has the courage to say, Dr. Wilkins, you got really angry back there and it seemed out of proportion. What's going on? That in and of itself takes a lot of courage to do. And so there's things that people could do. Hedi is always saying that you can't control other people. You can only control yourself. And so when you see someone acting that way, it takes a lot of courage to step up and say, that's kind of out of character for you. What's going on? That's a tough question to ask. I'm curious, when people have done that to you and called you on it, how have you reacted? Because I've had it happen to me before, and I know how I reacted. How do you take that when somebody calls you on it?
Yeah, so a lot of what let me just say, it probably depends on the situation. If I'm in an emergency situation, if I'm in an emergency situation and a patient's life is in danger or something terrible is happening very, very quickly, very dynamically, you don't really have a whole lot of time and a whole lot of cognitive availability for generating sensible emotions and behaviors. That's just a thing. I think there are probably very few people in the world who can operate with amazing emotional sensitivity and intelligence and grace while everything is falling apart right in front of you. And so in that situation, you do what you have to do. I say this a lot. There's a time for learning and there's a time for doing. And right now is a time for doing. So please stop trying to learn, so because we have to move fast. We got to go quickly. And I simply just cannot explain what we're doing because we're acting instinctually or something like that. Now, whenever that kind of a thing happens, I try real hard to take it upon myself to look back and do a little bit of a debrief of a critical incident or something that may have happened. And not only analyze the situation, but analyze, well, how did people work together? How did the team function? And analyze a little bit about myself and be like, well, how did I perform as a team leader? And so there may be a little bit of self-reflection there. And if you, I don't worry so much about offending somebody or people getting upset in that moment because we're all focused. And I understand at least that's how I have to operate. But I'll always try and debrief with people and be like, wow, that was really tense. Sorry, I got a little out of hand there, and try and make it up, because that's how you're going to keep the integrity of the team, is that people are going to trust you and they're going to be able to trust that we were all pointed in the same direction at that moment. but you know what? No, I'm really not that big of a jerk that I'm going to just turn around and woo, and hightail it out of there.
Dr. Schiavi, I think that's one really important factor when we just say, wow, I'm so sorry that happened. You know, I think people are a lot more receptive to that.
When somebody approaches me and they're like, wow, you're really a jerk, what's going on? Or, you know, I didn't really appreciate the way you talked to me. I think it's also situational, that if I'm not ready to step down from that situation yet, it's not going to be the right time to approach me. And I will probably come back with a very snippy, you know, response. It was like, you know, I'm sorry, this isn't about you and what you're thinking and your emotions right now. This is about the patient, and we got to focus on that. We can talk about it later, and that's fine. And so still in the heat of the moment, I don't think that I would react very well to that. But when I'm already in the mindset, okay, we need to start backing off of, you know, the emotionally charged situation or the crisis that we're just dealing with, I am far more receptive. And then it's like, hey, do you want to go sit? Well, let's go get a cup of coffee and talk about it. We'll debrief that incident. We'll debrief our you know, relationship.
Take the time.
That kind of thing. And make the time, exactly.
Yeah, so be aware of the situation.
Yep.
Yeah, be aware of the situation and pick your time, right? Is that good?
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Insight.
So we have three pretty big questions. The first one is from, and I hope I don't butcher your name, I probably will, J. Ricardo Carupoma. Carupoma?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you know.
Because I know.
He says, hi, Adam, great talk. Although I joined a little late, do you think newer generation of physicians have the emotional center of gravity placed on their own emotions and needs or in the patient's and surrogates' needs?
Yeah, I feel like newer physicians are more outwardly focused, because I think that is what we were talking a little bit, maybe Ricardo didn't hear this in the beginning, when we were talking about how we think that the training may be slightly different now than it used to be. And that I'm pretty sure that they're training a lot more cultural sensitivity into people. And really it's less about me and my emotion, my ego at that moment. Maybe it is in an emergency crisis, but I think that younger people are far more willing to outwardly look towards the patient more frequently and to recognize or to put their own ego aside a little bit easier than maybe it would be for us who were trained very differently. I'm not sure if that completely answered the question, but yeah, I do think younger people are emotionally focused in a slightly different place than the older people are. I mean, we may be focused due north and maybe the new people are, sliding a little bit, maybe northeast, it's still very similar, but maybe the emotional core of it is a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more willing to take in broader cultural possibilities, emotional possibilities, thinking a little bit deeper about, people with disabilities, or, a whole, like, much more inclusive way of thinking, and less inwardly motivated, but maybe more outwardly motivated.
Yeah. And to that point, Dr. Schiavi, we often talk about the importance, even with, I don't want to say older physician, more traditionally trained physicians, maybe. Because obviously a lot of it translates worldwide, surprisingly. I've worked in 1, 2, 3 different countries as a nurse, and it seems very consistent in physician culture. But I think one thing we talk a lot about is, even for traditionally trained physicians, you're very passionate about your patients and what you're trying to accomplish with them. It's just how you've been trained to respond to things might be a little bit different. But we as non-physicians have to recognize that if we can make the message about the patient, that you're probably going to be more open to that than if it seems like we're challenging you personally as a physician.
I think that is absolutely true. And I don't imagine that any physician with any emotional intelligence at all is going to react poorly to bringing something back to the patient and recentering on what's going on with the patient, unless unless you get the sense that maybe it's being done in a manipulative way. And sometimes that can happen as well. But whatever the case may be, however you accomplish the goal, of refocusing it back on the patient is probably a valid way of doing it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Great. Another question is from Emily Larimer. Shout out to Emily. I know Emily. She says, awesome thoughts. How do physicians within the framework of emotional safety prioritize their time to connect emotionally with families and patients, given the increased number of patients encounters required of many providers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Being an intensivist, it's not like I'm at an outpatient clinic or something. I know Harry will go to a surgical clinic and probably see, have to see 30 patients in a day. That's not something that I experience. So maybe Harry can address that issue when you really got to, think about the production pressure. In the ICU, I don't really experience that very often. And so I have in my day, like usually probably afternoon, usually starting around 1 o'clock, time devoted to dealing with families and having family meetings and family updates and things like that. And so I actually have the leisure of time, half an hour at a time to spend with a family and work with them and develop a relationship. And that relationship is extremely important, especially if it's like it's going to become an end of life situation or something like that, where you really need to have a good humanistic approach and a good connection with these people who they genuinely feel that you are connecting with them at a human level with the full range of emotions, not the physician that's got to run off and do something, but I am here with you for as long as it takes to work out whatever we have to work out, to make decisions, to coach through whatever might be happening at that moment.
Well, Adam, I will tell you, I'm so jealous that you have that time because I often don't have that time. Yeah. And oftentimes I'm meeting somebody and then taking them to the operating room right away.
Right.
And one of the things that a mentor of mine taught me a long time ago is that 5 minutes is not 5 minutes, is not 5 minutes. You can spend 5 minutes with one family and they can swear you were in there for 30 seconds. You can spend 5 minutes with another family and they can swear there for 30. And there's different techniques you can do. And one of the things he taught me, because I'm always rushing, he said, this is a typical thing to do, and I've always done this. You have 5 minutes. If you walk in and you stand with your arms crossed the whole 5 minutes just waiting to go, it's going to feel that. Mm-hmm. Take a chair. Now, don't do anything but give them attention for that 5 minutes. And that family will experience that differently than the family that sees you with your hand on the door, talking from the doorway, just waiting to go. That's the biggest trick that I have. And my patients tell me that helps them. They said, I'm really glad you sat down and talked to me because I felt like for at least that period of time, I had all of your attention. So just the simple act of sitting down, getting to their level and looking in their eyes was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that, Harry, because my other hat is as an anesthesiologist, and we have lots of production pressure, trying to get to the OR, you've got to be on time, first start, right? And you walk into the OR 1 minute late, you get an astegram about why are you in the room 1 minute late?
Yeah.
It's so, and then you have to justify it, whatever it was, right? And so, but it's a very similar thing where, you want to spend as much time as you can with the patient that you're, getting ready to bring into a very dangerous situation, going to the OR. Even, the most elective surgeries, have some risk. And if you're going to go under general anesthesia, it's not like being here, like sitting here. There's a increased risk. And I always try to teach the residents in anesthesia for that 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes or however much time you can grab away from the system, because that's how I say it, because you have to take it back from the system and then use it for your purposes to build that relationship, to build a connection with the patient, which is kind of ironic because as soon as that patient interaction begins, they're completely unconscious and then they don't know about that interaction anymore. But the family is going to see that and they're going to know that as well. And for the anesthesiologist and the person who's going to be bringing that person to the OR, it may be the first time you've ever met them. And I know that occurs with you too, like if you're in a trauma situation, but if you have patients, elective patients that you see and you already know them before the day of surgery frequently. But I always say to the residents, look, you've got 5 minutes to get somebody to trust you with their life. better make it good 5 minutes, right? And
Right.
if they don't feel you and they don't know you and they're not looking right into your eyeballs and seeing that human connection, they're not going to trust you and they're going to have increased stress and they're
And I think that's the
they're
key.
going to not have as good of an outcome because of
Yeah,
the stress.
you may not have a lot of time, but you still need to make the time to make a human connection.
Yeah.
And that does not take that long. When Hedi and I
That's
do
right.
our work, we keep our role plays to 1 minute because
Mhm.
oftentimes we are so stressed for time. It
Yeah.
does not take a lot of time to make a human connection. And that may be looking them in their eyes, saying their name, sitting down, getting to their level. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, giving them a
So in many
reason to
ways-
trust you.
Yeah, so in many ways, what I'm hearing you having to do with patients,
Yeah.
those of us who are non-physicians working with physicians should be applying those same techniques with the physicians. Would you?
Probably,
Yes.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I love it when somebody comes up and actually tries to make, have a conversation at a non-physician level, right? It's real easy as a physician or real easy for non-physicians to see a physician and be like, ooh, a physician, I want to ask him a question, or, oh, I want to, talk about doctor things because I think that's what they want to talk about because they're doctors and they've devoted their entire life to this. Again, coming back to that, cycle of
We're human.
expectations. It's
Yeah,
Right.
so we have one.
Hedi, you said there were 3 questions?
Yeah, we have one, it's a comment / you can kind of put it into a question as well. It says, I feel like, this is from Anissa Cole. She says, I feel like in the past, I've had more success with physician champions giving peer discussion and bringing other staff in. Now physicians are not as eager to help in our physician groups. They see things maybe getting agitated and they say, well, I don't want to step on Dr. X's toes. And they actually seem to expect nursing to pick up the pieces and address at a leadership level instead of a team approach. Is that something you've seen? Would you agree with that? How do you navigate that?
I think there's quite a bit to unpack there.
There is.
We may not have that much time, but to think about it, why would that be the case? I wonder if people are just not interested in having a confrontation when healthcare is moving faster and faster and more production pressure. And it's like, I can take care of my next 3 patients, or I can unpack this thing with a physician, or, I'm not sure if I'm doing the question justice there, but I think that people are much less likely to try and take that time back from the system and actually accomplish that goal, because maybe the incentives aren't in place to make that happen. We're incentivized for production, not for conflict resolution, I guess. And administrators resolve conflicts, not frontline, I said the word, frontline providers, sorry.
I was going to use the same word that you used, Adam. That's interesting. You mentioned it. It's incentives. To me, it sounds like that situation is not an alignment of incentives. Is that going to be something that's going to move me towards what I enjoy doing? Or is it going to be moving me away? So I was going to use the same word you used, was incentive. Interesting insight.
One thought that came to my mind was, there's a tendency for us as non-physicians to go to the physician that we like and that we can connect with easily and ask them to solve our problems with another physician because we're afraid to approach them or we haven't had the best experiences with them. And I think one thing we have an opportunity to work on is, one, to understand physicians better so our approach can be more effective with those physicians who are a little bit more challenging to have a conversation with, and try that first instead of always running to a peer physician who then has that and who we ask them to have that conversation. And I think sometimes we put physicians in an awkward position because they're easy for us to talk to. And now we want them to have that challenging conversation for us when we really should be the ones to try it first. And I think maybe to some extent we create that a little bit for ourselves, and there's an opportunity for us to learn. And to some extent, obviously on the flip side, it's good to hear where you're coming from, that, hey, my job is not to be your mediator and negotiator here. My job is to take care of my patients.
Well, sometimes it is. I mean, it's part of good leadership, right? I mean,
Right.
if the physician's going to claim to be the team leader, well, part of that is leadership and being able to help out with those types of things. I think anybody would say that's not my job is probably incorrect in that regard.
I will tell you on the flip side though is, and this happened to me a couple of months ago. I was walking down the hallway and a nurse that I know very well asked me to take a look at a patient. I'm like, oh, who is it? And it was the patient of another general surgeon. And she didn't agree with the dressing that he had ordered for it. I got extremely uncomfortable because I'm not this physician's director. It's not like it's my resident. This is a peer of mine. And I'm like, have you talked to him about it? He goes, well, yeah, but I just didn't really understand. I just want to get your thoughts on it. Well, to your point, Hedi, that puts me in a very awkward position because that's sort of overstepping my bounds there. Whereas if I'm the medical director and they're coming to me through normal channels, that's different. And to your point there, Adam, then it is my job if I'm the medical director.
Yeah.
But to put me in a position where I'm now going to be sort of curbsided, that's going to make me extremely uncomfortable there.
Well, and
you're not the team leader. You go back and have that hard, right. I would have you go back to that position and have that hard conversation with the physician.
Right, right. I mean, they're asking
that's
you
a tricky one.
To step out of your team leadership role for your team and like question the judgment of the leader of another team, right? And so, you have to go to the leader of the two leaders to be able to do something like that.
That's right. That's right.
There are times though peer conversations can be helpful, right? But I think we have to try ourselves first and educate ourselves to see if it's our approach and if we can build that better rapport with that physician. And if that fails, then maybe seek the peer physician who knows that physician well, who can maybe give us some feedback on, have you tried this and that, versus just them jumping in for you. And then if that fails, maybe setting a joint meeting together. So
that would make me feel much more comfortable. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, we have really, I think, spent a lot of great time on this and gone over time, but I think it was a really great discussion, really good questions. Somebody, Emily, submitted a comment here. Amazing thoughts, the human connection, how to set aside a specific time or use our body language to focus in to create the understanding of being heard. Thank you. And Anissa also thanked us for the comments.
Awesome.
Page 45 through 48 are talking about physician culture and the 3 tenets of physician culture that are pounded into our heads. And I will just read the 3 things that everybody should know is the reason why physicians act the way they do. Because, and it's true, physicians believe you, meaning the physician, are responsible for everything. 2, you must know everything. And 3, everything is a reflection upon you. And these are the things that your physicians believe. These are the things your physicians have been taught. And most every adverse communication situation that you may end up with is a direct result of the physician's belief in these 3 principles, but also the physician's belief that everybody else believes that that's what the physician should be also. And that sets up the cycle of expectations and assumptions that can lead to bad communication.
So we're going to close the call off. Adam, thank you so much. This has been great. I loved it. Thank you everybody for calling in. And so we will let you know next time we have our next Fundamental Roots and Friends. But Adam, thank you so much. You all have a great day and happy Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, thank you, Harry.
Bye, guys.
I appreciate it. Take care.